A long time ago, the gods and goddesses that inhabited the upper world of Tenkai descended upon humanity to live amongst the beings of the lower world. They had become intrigued by human social constructs like culture and business, and decided that these phenomena would serve as their entertainment. They went in search of new experiences, ones that couldn't be found in their old, boring, perfect worlds. Things like food, hobbies, art, and friendship looked as if it would bring this whole new wave of excitement to these gods who simply sat idly by in their own world. Long story short, they left their positions as the eternal monitors of Gekkai to go experience these things for themselves. But the full history behind their descent is a topic for another day. Right now, you're here to learn about every god and goddess in the world of DanMachi. So, let's get to it, starting with the ones that we know the least about. In Sword Oratoria, the side story anime to DanMachi that literally nobody watched, we're briefly shown the god known as Uranos. He's named after the primordial Greek god of the sky, with the word itself meaning sky or heaven, which is rather fitting because although likely unknown to you, this god was one of the first to descend from Tenkai. You see, a lot of the gods and their familias tie deeply into the mythological characters that they're named after. Obviously, the gods have a much more clear similarity to their fabled counterparts, but even their children have a lot of symbolic traits that they can relate to as well. As for Uranos, given that in mythology he was one of the first gods to be born out of the void of chaos, the place that existed before the earth itself, it makes sense why he'd be one of the first people to descend to Gekkai. But unlike the other gods who came after, his reasoning wasn't for fun or excitement. He came as an administrator, a supreme god that would moderate all others through the very guild he established when he first descended upon humanity. That's why he's often referred to as the father of Arario. Although he has the power to do so, he doesn't attempt to rule over Gekkai as an overlord. He merely monitors and moderates the gods and their powers in the lower world. Should a god need to use their arcanum, they would have to make a direct request to Uranos himself. Only with his permission can they use their divine power and not be punished for it. We actually see this very briefly in action during the War Games arc. Hermes makes a request to use his arcanum, and we hear Uranos respond to give him permission. Aside from all that though, there's plenty more going on behind the scenes that will slowly be revealed as the story goes on. Next we have Zeus and Hera. These are two gods that are best talked about together since their role in the story is a shared one. You see, not too long before the current events of this series, in fact only 15 years before it, both Zeus and Hera stood above all other gods as the ones with the strongest familia. It's quite fitting considering their mythological roles as the king and queen of the gods. Of course, I'm sure you're well aware that they're not around anymore. So what happened? As I mentioned last video, the world bestowed upon Arario 3 great quests, each being a powerful monster that had escaped from the dungeon. Now, Zeus and Hera were at the height of their power, with adventurers in their familia that were considered to be some of the most powerful in history, so they were pretty much obligated to accept this quest. The Leviathan and Behemoth were taken care of, but it was the Black Dragon who proved to be a more powerful adversary, and it was this Dragon King who wiped out both Zeus and Hera's familias, leaving them nothing left but to return to Arario completely vulnerable. Loki and Freya saw this as a great opportunity to seize their own places at the top as the strongest familia. So they both teamed up and waged war on Zeus and Hera, eventually leading to Zeus and Hera being banished from the city. I mean, there was really nothing that they could do, and the guild didn't have any means to stop it from happening. As for what they're doing now, well, no one really knows where Hera went, but we know from the end of season 1 that Zeus moved out to the country and raised his adopted grandson Bel, only to later go out and fake his own death for reasons unknown. So those were the old top dogs of Arario. Now we have Loki and Freya. I'm sure you're quite familiar with the fact that Loki is named after the trickster god of Norse mythology. An interesting thing that you may not have known was that he had the ability to change his shape and sex, thus likely why Loki has a more androgynous look to herself. I mean, Bel even thought she was a guy when he saw her for the first time, especially since she likes to dress like a guy a lot. As for what she does for Arario, well, considering that she's one of the top 2 familias in the entire city, it makes sense that her familia is focused around dungeon exploration. Her children lead many expeditions through the deeper floors of the dungeon, but it has been noted that just like her namesake, she does like to cause a bit of trouble with the other gods. Now, Freya as the more powerful goddess is named after the Norse god of beauty and love. as well as fertility and fine material possessions like gold. In fact, one of the poems that Freya was featured in had Loki accusing her of sleeping with literally every god. She was certainly known for being this seeker of pleasure and passion, which translates fairly closely into the character that we see in DanMachi. You see, Freya has a similar habit to Apollo. She'll make a move on any male or female that's caught her interest, then proceed to do anything it takes to obtain said person, regardless of whether they're already in a familia or not. Her particular tastes are towards the most talented adventurers, which, after spotting one, she will immediately do everything in her power to make them her own. So why hasn't she taken Bel for herself then? Well, Bel's sort of a special case. Rather than swiftly stealing him away from Hestia, which she can do very easily on any given day, she decides to watch over him, noting how his alarming rate of growth is likely somewhat attributed to his relationship with Hestia. And to disrupt that would be the same as disrupting his growth. As for her own relationship with Bel, she likes to refer to it as love at first sight, enjoying every moment she gets to watch him grow. Not only taking pleasure from when he's courageously triumphing over powerful foes, but also when he's struggling through life-threatening situations. Both his anguish and his bravery appeal to this goddess, but it's hard to say if she would ever actually let him die. I mean, if he was to succumb to some unfortunate incident, then she'd made it clear that she'd chase after Bel's spirit all the way to the ends of space and time. That's just how obsessed she was with him. She even goes as far as to manufacture situations in order to accelerate his growth. In fact, the grimoire Bel used to learn magic back in Season 1 was something that was purposefully planted by Freya to make him get stronger faster. Now, there's a couple things about Freya that aren't quite explained at all in the anime. Particularly how she's always able to keep an eye on Bel. When I mentioned earlier that it was love at first sight, there was actually a bit more to it. It wasn't Bel himself that Freya was attracted to, but rather his soul. You see, just like how the Norse god Freya is known for being one of the most skilled practitioners of Norse magic, Freya has a few abilities of her own that gives her an edge over the other gods. Ones that aren't classified as arcanum since they can't be turned off. One is known as the Eyes of Insight, an ability that allows her to see the truth inside the souls of mortals. It's a natural gift that essentially shows the color and brilliance of the people of Gekai. It's how she's able to decide who she wants to join her familia. And it was with this ability that she first spotted Bel's brilliant soul from the Tower of Babel. While he was training with Eyes on the city walls, a place that's normally off limits, she saw two rather rare spectacles. First was Eyes' soul, which was shining like a golden light. Then she saw Bel's, which was completely clear and looked wholly innocent. Needless to say, it was this sight that drew her to him, and she won't stop trying to see more and more of it, all while trying to get it to flourish into something greater. But should something or someone try to get in her way of that, well, let's just say that there's a reason why she's the most powerful goddess in Arario. Switching over to another iteration of the goddess of love, we have my personal favorite version, Ishtar. And it's totally not because the Fate version of her is pretty much written. Anyway, Ishtar is like the original goddess of love due to her ancient Mesopotamian origins, however, isn't quite as known as her Norse or Greek counterparts. Within DanMachi, she's essentially the owner of the entire Pleasure District, the area known as Balit Babali. It's here that anyone could find a way to satisfy their most carnal desires. Now, there's nothing too much I can say about Ishtar without going into some major spoiler territory. But what I'm sure you figured out by now is that Ishtar absolutely despises Freya. She wants nothing more than to be able to take Freya's place as the strongest in Arario. But unlike Freya, who actually respects her children, Ishtar isn't quite as kind to her own. Now, the last relatively unknown gods that have been mentioned in the main series are Athena and Astraea. Athena is the Greek goddess of wisdom and war, only ever being mentioned as one of the top 3 virgins of Tenkai alongside Hestia and Artemis. Astraea is the Greek goddess of innocence, justice, and order, one that lived alongside humans during the golden age of man, only to abandon them at the dawn of the Iron Age and transform into the constellation Virgo. Being a goddess of justice, her familia once acted as the police force that maintained a relative level of order within Arario. But after a trap was laid against them, all members except for Ryu were killed. Astraea didn't want Ryu to go out and get revenge. She pleaded with her not to seek out the ones that killed her familia. But that was something that Ryu just couldn't accept. So Ryu had told Astraea to leave so she didn't have to watch her last remaining child go down this path of vengeance. Yes, Astraea is still alive, but no one knows where she's been since. Moving on to some more familiar gods now, let's talk a bit about Soma, a word that was originally used to describe a plant-based drink that the Hindu gods used to gain their immortality. When it was given to humans, it gave them a boost in energy, thus making the eyes of both gods and humans alike see this Soma as some sort of divine substance. It was later personified as the deity Soma, sometimes representing the moon, but more times than not the divine drink that he's named after, making him similar to the other Roman gods of wine. Knowing this, it makes sense why Soma is so devoted to his hobby of brewing wine. But I'm sure you've noted with the first few episodes of Season 2 that it seems to be something more than just a hobby. He would rarely speak to any of his familia, and focus solely on creating the wine that was in front of him. Though that wasn't always the case. Once upon a time, he did have a wholesome vision for himself and his children. But after he saw how weak-willed his familia was to the effects of his wine, he lost all hope in them, and chose to instead use them to polish his hobby. He bestowed and entrusted all responsibilities to his chosen captain, Xanis Lustra, and ever since hasn't touched any tasks related to his familia's affairs. After all, the fact remains that he did only come to Gekkai to practice his wine-making skills. It was only after Lily showed her resistance to the effects of his wine that he began to get a grip on reality again. Running parallel to this arc with Soma and Lily was the War Games arc starring Apollo. He's a much more complex god than simply just the god of the sun. He was blessed with many praiseworthy traits, resulting in him being known as the god of many other things like poetry, truth, archery, music, dance, and even healing and diseases. Many artistic and creative subjects are attributed to him, which is why at first I found it strange that such a cultured god would be portrayed in such an antagonistic way. Only after I realized that Apollo wasn't actually a villain, but instead just a god with an intense passion for the beautiful, did it start to make more sense. Especially after learning that Apollo is known for having many ill-fated love affairs, amongst both gods and humans alike, some of which share the names of his more notable children, like Cassandra, Daphne, and Hyacinthus. And I say ill-fated because not a single one of these relations ended up well. Cassandra was given by Apollo her prophetic powers as a means of seduction. However, Cassandra just didn't find Apollo very appealing. Now, Apollo wasn't allowed to simply take those powers back, so instead, he took away her ability to persuade people, making it so that no person would ever believe her prophecies, even though they are guaranteed to be always right. Daphne was vowed to Artemis, but Apollo grew in interest and stalked her day in and day out. It got to the point that she couldn't take it anymore, so she got the river god Peneus to turn her into a laurel tree just so she didn't have to deal with Apollo. Now, Apollo loved Daphne so much that he decided to wear a laurel wreath as a symbol of his undying love to her. In the anime, a similar styled wreath can be found atop Apollo's head. Finally, Hyacinthus was one of the few people that actually loved Apollo back. But Hyacinthus had his own admirer, and when this person saw that they would not be able to step between Apollo and Hyacinthus' love, they killed him out of jealousy. So, as you can tell, Apollo's role in DanMachi as this extremely passionate individual ties very closely to his mythological counterpart, much more than I ever could have imagined. Now, a god that we see a lot of but whose purpose remains shrouded in mystery is Hermes, commonly known as the Greek god of trade, commerce, athleticism, and trickery. Similar to Loki, he was often referred to as this divine trickster. However, that title was often dwarfed by his more notable position as the messenger and emissary of the gods, one that would often have to travel between the realm of humanity and the gods, thus resulting in his equal appeal to both realms. He was a rather clever individual who would often use his wits to outsmart other gods, either for his own entertainment or for the sake of humanity. This is likely why Hermes in DanMachi may appear to others to be like this casually mischievous individual, but as we've seen, he's actually quite cunning. Most of the time, he'll prefer to just observe the events around him, often taking a neutral stance while watching everything unfold. But he will occasionally slyly insert himself into the mix to make things a bit more interesting. Being the messenger of the gods and someone who's frequently doing non-dungeon related quests for the guild, him and his familia are free to enter and exit Orario as they see fit. But due to Zeus's personal ask for him to watch over Bel, he's been spending more and more time within Orario, all while using his familia as a means to gain profit anywhere possible. This likely attributed to his roots as a god of trade and commerce. Let's talk Hephaestus next. He in mythology, or she in the show, is the god of blacksmithing and metalworking. In myth, he became known as the ugly god. Some believe it's because he was born lame with a physical deformity, which disgusted his mother Hera, resulting in him being thrown off Mount Olympus. But others believe that it's because Zeus was angered by him, so Zeus grabbed him by the leg and still threw him off Mount Olympus. Either way, his parents didn't seem to like him and he had some form of crippling body defect. Even so, he became a master craftsman, creating the most renowned architectural wonders, automata, and arms or armor that the Greek gods had ever seen. Thus why Hephaestus is known as the goddess of the forge in Tenkai, with her brand being some of the most sought after goods not only in Arario but all over the world. This particular skill can be attributed to her ability known as Master Smith. Under normal circumstances, her superior craftsmanship would be a direct result of her arcanum, but with her natural ability of Master Smith, it allows her to make weapons like Bel's Hestia knife without the use of her divine powers. Now, you may be wondering where her physical defect is. Well, that's where the eye patch comes in. Apparently, many people seemed to fear or hate what they saw underneath that eye patch. Even members of her own familia seemed to cringe at the sight of it. This eventually developed into a complex due to the constant discrimination, leading to the eye patch that we see her wear today. Only Hestia ever acted normal around her, never showing any signs of fear or hate. It's for this reason that the two of them became such close friends back in Tenkai. Hephaestus even sheltered her in Gekkai while she was broke and homeless, at least until she realized that Hestia was just a freeloading NEET, which at that point she had to kick her out. Of course, not before finding her that abandoned church to live in and a job selling potatoes to make some money. Even now though, she still shows a lot of concern for Hestia. That's just how close their bond is. Other close friends of Hestia include Takemikazuchi and Miyake. Takemikazuchi is the Shinto warrior god of thunder and swords, also sometimes referred to as the chief deity of Kashima, a subtle reference to the Takemikazuchi familia's captain, Kashima Oka. In myth, Takemikazuchi was most well known for leading a military campaign against humanity by the orders of Amaterasu, though I think the aspects most relevant to the Take from the anime are his renown with the sword and his roots in Japanese spiritualism. It's these mythological elements that are likely passed down to the children of Take's familia. Thus why their appearance and equipment seem to have such a strong Eastern influence, specifically their attire and their use of iconic Japanese weapons. Miyake is known to be one of the sons of the Irish god of healing. The thing about Miyake though was that he was a far more skilled healer than his father ever was, so much so that his father ended up killing him out of jealousy. But to highlight how skilled with medicine he really was, when his father attempted to strike him down with his sword, it took 4 strikes to complete the job. The first 3 strikes cut the skin, broke his skull, and even grazed his brain. But Miyake healed each wound completely. Only after his father cut his brain clean in half did Miyake finally die. Now, just like how he is in DanMachi, he was kind by nature, using his medicinal expertise to help others, becoming well known for replacing another god's silver prosthetic arm, one that was made by his father, with a different one made of real flesh and blood. This is a key theme referenced by Miyake's child Naza. You see, when Naza was heavily injured in the dungeon resulting in the loss of her right arm, Miyake gave up everything his familia had, and even went into debt to get his father's familia to create a prosthetic arm for her, a silver arm no less, pretty much making Naza a direct reference to the Irish god that Miyake helped in myth. Anyway, Miyake's background as this skilled yet broke potion seller is well justified by his roots in Irish mythology. It makes sense why he would often give Bel and Hestia potions for free. It was just in his nature to help others. Finally, we have Ganesha, who really only ever shows up on occasion. He's named after the highly worshipped Hindu god of beginning and success, easily identified as the deity with the head of an elephant, and represented in DanMachi more so as the outgoing god of the masses who constantly references himself and wears the mask of an elephant. In Arario, he's one of the more open gods, who will often hold festivities in his own home, which is something that no other god is usually willing to do. Although he seems rather self-absorbed, like by having a house that's literally in the shape of his image, he's actually a man of strong ideals, always prioritizing the safety of Arario over anything else. So long as the people are protected and are having fun, his image means nothing to him. And that's every god from the main DanMachi series as you know them so far. Of course, there are gods that I haven't mentioned like Demeter or Dionysus from Sword Oratoria, but they could be shared another time. And yes, I know I didn't talk about Hestia, but I think that if I was to talk about her, she'd probably get her own video. Anyway, I'm just testing out lore videos to see if you guys prefer this over the cut content. Honestly, it's a good switch up from simply talking about missed out plot elements. So if you enjoyed this one, then I can definitely work towards doing a video on each familia, their roles and members, or maybe something like how leveling and experience works in the world. Both, to me, are quite interesting. Just let me know what you guys think. Now, as always, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this type of anime content, then you already know what to do. So, until next time, ciao!